Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So recently, the ICO fined a company for a breach that began with a phishing email, which was then managed to leverage unsupported software, which resulted in a ransomware attack. Kind of all pretty standard stuff. And relatively speaking, the loss itself was only about 100K of sort of data subjects. So it didn't really have any lasting effects because the data that they exfiltrated wasn't really too sensitive. But what was interesting was that company was fined 4.4 million, and 1 million of that was due to the fact that the company in question had security policies which were good on paper, but they failed to implement them. And this ruling showed that the security industry, the regulating bodies, are now coming down hard on organizations that merely pay lip service to security. And now this is a big shift, and businesses really need to take note and do more in the security space. Because by 2025, it's estimated that 10.5 trillion will be lost to cyber criminals. And that's more than all the tech billionaires' net worth combined. It's the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. Hacking humans is a very lucrative business. And the security industry is always striving to be one step ahead of the criminals in terms of technical capabilities, but in doing so, often neglect the very human side of cybercrime. I think we should change that. So, as your guide in all things human-centric product and security, let me introduce my co-speaker and myself.
Hi, I'm Jeff Watkins. As mentioned, I'm Chief Product and Technology Officer at XDesign, but also a security enthusiast. I've just completed a Master's in Cybersecurity.
And I'm Lianne Potter. I am the owner of the Anthro Securist, which is combining anthropology and security together. I'm also head of SecOps at Asda. So as a security practitioner myself, I can say that the security tools are doing a pretty good job, especially things like the DevSecOps tools, such as, the SAST and DAST, things like Sneak, for example. But tools can only take you so far in your security posture journey. And if we want a layered security, and we do, we need to start thinking holistically. And it starts with perception. We need to stop thinking of security as security's problem. Indeed, by even calling it a problem, we're already mentally categorizing it as a burden. A problem is unwelcome, a problem is difficult, a problem is something we hope someone else will fix. And we avoid problems in lieu of more engaging tasks. But we need to get out this mindset, because good security is an opportunity to add value to our products and to our customers. Gold standard security, in my eyes, should not mean compromising on quality. It shouldn't mean picking one over the other, because we need to get out of this mindset, and we need to know our enemy to do so. Because the cyber criminals are using what makes us human against us. They're becoming ever more sophisticated, more nuanced, and they understand the culture and the constraints in which we work in, and they leverage this knowledge. And they know that we love in our organization shortcuts and workarounds, which often go against security controls, and they play upon our inability to collaborate effectively, and it prevents us from doing security holistically. As I said, the security tools will only get us so far, so we're going to show you today how to utilize your strongest defenses in your organization, your people. Cyber criminals don't think like we do. They have a different set of objectives to us, and in order to thwart these attacks, we need to emulate what makes them so successful at what they do. We're calling it, and just more for any younger ears in the audience, the fool around and find out mentality. It was a different F word to start with. The cyber criminals' ability to flip the user journey to the unhappy path is what makes them successful to take down even the most well-resourced of organizations. So today, we're going to show you how to fool around and find out, how to think like a hacker, how to make sense of what you're building, and how to bring everyone into the conversation, not just security, not just engineers, not just the techies, but the whole business. And the best part, most of you will already know how to do this. Many of the tools and strategies we will share with you today are methodologies you'll be familiar with if you've worked in an agile environment. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to our talk, Abuser Experience, how the dark side of product and security can be used for abuser stories, misuse cases, and threat modeling.
The first part about embracing the abuser experience is something we've all heard about, and that's shifting left. We all benefit from it because it's easier and faster to design security from the beginning rather than testing it and fixing it later. In fact, shifting left has been deemed so important that in 2021, a new category was introduced to the OWASP Top 10 in secure design. It focuses on risks related to design and architectural flaws, with a call to shifting left for greater use of threat modeling and secure design patterns. And even like our hub sponsors today, Sneak, have noted that shifting left has several benefits: faster overall delivery due to not failing security gates, reduced costs in rework, improved integration with security tooling, improved overall security posture, and greater trust in the end product. And that's what we want at the end of the day. But for you in the room today, why should you really care? I mean, well, for you, it's going to make your lives easier in general. You won't spend your evenings and weekends fixing security design flaws. You won't have to trash any beautiful UI designs with bolt-on security tech, and you'll have pride in well-trusted, reviewed, and adopted products. So we've established that shifting left is good, but how far left can we go? How about all the way to the product and design elements of the project, long before any coding or architecture happens? The product in the modern context being the bundle of business value is the top level concern. So we start considering security at that level. And product security is becoming its own thing, and it's not going to be a single framework or tool. It's going to be a sort of a way of working. It be an approach to structuring a security program around threat modeling of the entire scope of product, not just the technology that underpins them. Strangely enough, though, searching online, product security is currently pretty poorly represented. Books on security don't mention it really, and books on product don't do either, apart from maybe one sentence. So how is product security different from traditional application security? Well, let's compare with the security within a product team with the AppSec teams in larger tech companies. So the core component of most established cybersecurity teams is a strong AppSec program, at least I hope it is, and ensures that IT applications are developed to a high security standard and vulnerabilities are identified and addressed as they arise. And they usually specify a secure software delivery lifecycle as well as security tooling. It's pretty technical, and they'll usually report to the CISO. Whereas the activities within the product team, on the other hand, focus on designing security into products and will often report to the CTO. The experts within the product team will be engaged at every stage of the product process. They're less concerned with things like network design and rolling out policies, but we believe that thinking about security in the product terms better enables us to understand the abuser experience.
So the abuser experience, what is it? Well, it's kind of like an evil version of user experience. They're the anti-users. To find the abuser experience, we should think about who our abusers are, why they might attack us, how they might attack, which we can express in the context of threat modeling using things like Stride, Pasta, or Octave. But contrary to what you might expect, the who's doing it, is probably the least useful to us, aside from possibly thinking about scale. In order to get buy-in, start on your user experience. Don't get hung up on the who, unless it's really your job to be a security researcher, because attribution actually won't make your security posture easier to protect. What matters is how. Knowing if they're an individual hacker or part of an elite nation state or an ATP doesn't really help you understand that your logging page is vulnerable to attack. When you're starting to think about that design process, what matters is the mindset of the enemy. It's the thinking about it in an adversarial way. Attackers are motivated. They don't have rules to follow or processes of governance like we do in organization, and they leverage this in ways we can't even imagine or consider. You know, hackers look at things differently. I can get that out. In particular, they observe the obvious and they imagine the worst. They go about it through exploring every potential access point. They love all things data, and they understand that humans are a weak link, and they find and exploit backdoors, pick through garbage. And the most striking difference between hackers and engineers is how they address a challenge. Like, engineers are often very systematic. You know, the problems are first defined and analyzed. You know, then a plan is formed, hypothesis is formulated, and then this is tested. Then those results are analyzed and conclusions are drawn. We would call this the scientific method. But hackers don't do a spike. They fool about and find out. There is no plan, but rather a mission. And remember, a hacker is not building something that must stand the test of time like we are. Rather, they are breaking things. They don't need to satisfy a manager. They don't need to satisfy a CEO. They only need to complete a mission. And hackers will go to almost any length to accomplish that mission. And they can discard results that don't help them rather than having to explain it to others. So in brief, engineers aim to be thorough, hackers aim to be effective at any cost. This may seem like a minor nuance, but when you put action to those nuances, they can have really significant implications. Now, all this sounds like a little bit armchair psychology from the security team, but does that mean you should leave all this stuff to your security team?
Well, we do need to know whose problem it is, that's for sure. But no, we shouldn't, at least not exclusively, leave it to the security team. Thinking that way creates an over-the-wall mentality, creates a gatekeeping situation, and crucially also ruins any attempt at a lean, agile approach by blocking work and reducing throughput. This thinking does not also promote autonomy, mastery, or purpose in the delivery team. And security teams just aren't big enough in most organizations. They end up massively overloaded. So bring people into your team early, bring security into the team early, and they can leave you with that autonomy to actually work yourselves. And we also often think that security should be left to the technologists. And the technical elements of cybersecurity are incredibly important, but they're only a very small part of the story, really. By the time security concerns have reached technologists, they may be more difficult to fix as they weren't designed in from scratch. But more than that, cybersecurity is often not user-centric, because security is not a primary user task. You don't think, oh, I want to log in today. You want to use a service. And as such, it can be inconvenient if it is implemented poorly, even if it still meets your blessed, beloved security NFRs. So it's not solely up to the security team or the technologist. Who then? And I think really should be, for everybody, it really should be a cross-functional whole team concern. But we believe that you should start with the people like the user research and the user experience designers. This means we'll have to think more terms in form and function rather than mechanism when it comes to security. And now we've talked about our team and our attackers' motivations. It's time to discuss some of the techniques to help us start thinking like the enemy. It's time to embrace the dark side of the user experience, the abuser experience. And this forms like the core of product security. There's a number of tools and techniques we've identified, only a few of which we'll have time to go over today because it's the shortest slot, and I'm not going to read all these out. But at the bottom there's threat modeling at the very last, and we've done that for a purpose. And we'd recommend that the first time you try product security techniques to be in a workshop environment, actually in person if possible, or at least like a proper collaborative online environment. Start with a warm-up icebreaker exercise to get the team thinking like the abuser. Think of a kind of a Jordan Belfort kind of example. Exercises to team build, but also to get people to put the abuser hat on. Instead of sell me this pen, it's hack this Apple Pencil or equivalent. Once you got into the mood, another exercise is to go over your product's features and ask why. Easy to miss glaring weaknesses when you're deep in development. So step back and ask the 5 whys deep assessment. Why does your product do that? Why is it necessary? Why did you design it that way? Why is it good? Why not do it differently? And the point of this very simple exercise is to identify really obvious weaknesses before you get too deep into anything, because a hacker will notice them much quicker than you think. So now we've warmed up, what next? And one of the first things people think about when talking about security is threat modeling.
Now, briefly, threat modeling is an engineering technique, and you can use this to help you identify threats, attacks, vulnerabilities, and countermeasures that could affect your application. And you can use threat modeling to shape your application's design, which is what it's quite good for. And it can help you meet your security objectives and reduce risks. As an engineering technique, ask 4 questions, and those 4 questions are, what are we building? What could go wrong? What are we doing to defend against threats? And have we acted on each of the previous steps? Now, it's very focused on things like Stride, Pastor, and Octave, and others, and it can be quite technical and intensive as a process, which puts people off. And I found, anything technical and intensive, people avoid it. So we recommend another way.
And one technique we recommend to start with is persona non grata, or PNG. A PNG represents a typical user who behaves in an unwanted and possibly nefarious way. However, like ordinary personas, PNGs have specific goals they wish to achieve and specific actions that they might take to achieve their goals. Modeling PNG can therefore help us think about the ways in which a system might be vulnerable to abuse and use this information to specify appropriate mitigation requirements. Obviously, you'll develop some kind of user personas for the genuine user of your system, and you should probably interview them and validate any segmentation of your audience and things like that. It's a bit more difficult when you're trying to interview your persona non grata. They probably aren't going to make themselves known to you or give you the answers you want. However, with a bit of imagination, this approach can make threat modeling more tractable by asking the team to focus on the attackers, their motivations and their abilities. Here's an example from one of the security major security sites. And this could sound redundant if you're doing other threat modeling such as Stride. However, Carnegie Mellon University found a study that PNG analysis performed consistently well, even in teams where there was much poorer performance using things like Stride. So it's a good entry point to product security activities, in our opinion. And the next technique is misuse cases. And I'm sure many of you have used good old-fashioned use cases, and probably in the form of UML diagrams like shown, not very pretty diagrams. And these are the expected good use cases. But based on what we've done so far, we can now start to map our PNGs to our who are our abusers to what part of the products they'll attack and how. I'm going to do this with misuse cases, which are the inverse of a regular use case, and describe the process of executing malicious acts against the system. And typically, you'd put them on the same diagram as your use cases. Here we go. So why are these a good thing? Well, for one, you can create and visualize them without going straight to the abstract world of security NFRs. They emphasize security from the beginning of the design process and help avoid hasty design decisions. And they're very visual and cross the barrier well between technical and non-technical. And then what we do is we link this all this up. So creating misuse cases often triggers a chain reaction, which eases the identification of functional and non-functional requirements, but also leads to the creation of new use cases that act as countermeasures. So you see there the mitigation of the countermeasures in the middle of the diagram. Even if you're not into UML, this is a pretty simple diagram to create and understand. You don't need fancy tools to create them. However, they're not suitable as sole modeling tools. They're quite high level and simple, and they don't really have much in the way of structure semantics, but they're an excellent place to start modeling your actual threats. After that, you can take some of your misuse cases and turn them into attack trees, which may drive out further details for the next step. And attack trees represent attacks against the system in a tree structure, with the goal as the root node and different ways of achieving that goal as leaf nodes. So our goal is somehow to, in this case, extract money from the casino. These diagrams can be used, so this is an example of extracting money from a casino in various ways. Can be used in both the requirements and the design phases. They can be represented graphically or can be written down in an outline form. However, I quite like the diagram version of this. And you can also add other details like the cost of the attack and the actual potential rewards to help balance the priorities. And Microsoft uses a similar diagram called threat trees in their threat modeling activities, adding in the mitigated threats. Now, we can't go into detail how to build these today, but as you can see, they don't need to be technical and they can be done by the whole team.
So how do we take these previous few exercises that Jeff's gone through and turn them into something useful from a security perspective? I'm sure, as we've all heard, like the security NFRs, their title is non-functional requirements for those that don't know. They can be really abstract and to non-technical people, non-technologists, really quite hefty and difficult to deliver in a 2-week sprint. So it's real fodder to get really dusty on someone's backlog. So let's move away from clunky NFRs into something much more human, much more familiar. Now, this is a standard user story, and we can take this standard user story and flip it to the dark side. I should put like a witch cackle voice on now. But this is an abuser story. So this is the inverse of that. It describes an interaction of a malicious user posing a threat to a system, as well as the potential risk that may occur from that malicious interaction. This is a much more useful way of doing it than security NFRs, in my opinion, and I'm a security person. At the product level, we don't need to really understand the how, but we should detail what the abuser would like to achieve within its acceptance criteria, just like a regular user story. So my recommendation to you, and this is something I've done with success at quite a lot of organizations I've worked with, is to have a workshop with the security team and make misuse cases and abuser stories for every security NFR. This means that it'll be much more accepted onto your backlog as it frames security in a way that's digestible, but also gives you the autonomy to solve the problems in your own way.
And hopefully we've convinced you that thinking like the bad guys is a fun way to problem solve too. And we do love solving problems in the industry. That's why I got into it. Which brings us back to threat modeling, which is one of the most important aspects of cybersecurity. However, we feel it's often overcomplicated. The methods can be time-consuming and require quite a lot of expertise. And the complexity distracts us from what we really want to achieve. Threat modeling is just the process of answering a few questions about any system you're trying to build or extend. What is the system and who cares about it? What does it need to do? What bad things can happen to it through accident or attack? What must be true about the system so it'll still what it needs to do, even under attack? And we kind of played a trick on you. These alternatives to Pastor and Stride are also valid threat modeling techniques. And there's actually quite a lot of them. So based on that little trick, what's the so what of this entire set of exercises is they work well together. Off the back of them, you'll have your owners and threat agents through your PNG, assets, threats through misuse cases and abuser stories that maybe they exploit potential vulnerabilities and your potential countermeasures. And you can also do some more technical threat modeling later, but this actually supports it all. And the reason we could do it this way is because it divides and conquers a complex problem. It's progressive and you gain value at every step. It's focused. It keeps you at a single conceptual level for every exercise. And it's breaking down threat modeling into its constituent parts and making it accessible to everybody. And evaluating the various threat modeling techniques, it's found that Octave and Pasta were considered both very difficult to learn and use, even for security practitioners. And Stride was intermediate for both, whereas things like PNG, misuse cases, and everything like that were considered easy to learn and use, even for non-experienced people in a team. So we've done some threat modeling through different means, and now what? Well, we need to put it into our agile delivery lifecycle. And this should obviously involve thinking about, having a secure software delivery lifecycle and DevSecOps and all that stuff. We can't talk about that today, really. But from a product security point of view, we can think in lean, agile ways to implement it as efficiently as possible. So be as lean as possible, early is cheaper. Doing this, major security needs are identified already in the requirements decomposition. We avoid bottlenecks and queues by actually making sure that decision and risk approval is done locally. We reduce variability because we actually start to build threat analysis into our business as usual when we're analyzing stories. We do things in small batches. We address the security one story at a time. We provide rapid feedback, risk acceptance that could be done at the product owner level. And we decentralize it all. Every team and product owner does it and is responsible for security. It scales naturally with no single point of failure or bottleneck. One thing to mention about security in Agile is that the traditional security NFR is unlikely to deliver in any given sprint. As mentioned, they're abstract, they're difficult to fully prove. However, if you link your abuser stories both to your user stories and your security NFRs, you have like a bridge. You can have a testable and documented proof that you've gone some way to implementing security NFR. And all this links back to your persona and your PNG, and you have a steel thread through your system for all that should and shouldn't be happening through the user stories all the way through to your NFRs.
So you've done all that, you think this is a good idea, you want to implement it. Next thing you need to do is get the security culture right. It's vitally important to apply these tools and techniques that we discussed so far. And the most effective way to start moving your organization is often, considered top-down leadership, but a lot of CEOs don't really understand the value and quality proposition that security can offer, let alone what product security can bring. So you're going to have a challenge on your hands. But how can you embed what we've discussed today for a long-lasting benefit? Now, often security people ask me, which team do I start with when I'm changing the security culture in my organization? And my answer is always the same: with the security team. That's where you start. Poor security culture is often due to poor organizational culture, and many security teams fall victim to this because they're often the most under-resourced, underfunded, and underloved areas of the business. I think recent figures are 1 security person per every 100 developers, and that's in a well-resourced organization. So consequently, this function has historically been very stretched. They've had to say no a lot. Not because they want to, because they've had to be self-preservationists. How can you oversee the security of an entire organization when we don't have the funds, nor the clout to do so? But this is where you, engineers, can help us change things and be an ally. Moreover, I think you're really going to love doing it. So I'd like to mention a book called Drive by Daniel Pink, and it talks about motivation. And he claims the secret to high performance and satisfaction personally and professionally is due to motivation. He talks about common notions of motivation being things like reward and punishment, so the carrot and the stick. This, he says, doesn't work and actually causes harms and hinders performance. So he created something called Motivation 3.0, which has 3 essential elements. So the first one is autonomy, which is the desire to direct our own lives. Now, security teams are often a really great example of a team being afraid of autonomy by being gatekeepers to most teams, and they're the bottlenecks of signing off project, being the only ones to approve or change controls. But we all seek to direct how we do things, so it's important to fight for your autonomy. The other thing he discusses is mastery. It's to urge people to get better and better at something that matters. And he calls this, Daniel Pink calls this flow, which is only optimal when the challenges we face are matched by our abilities. So in the context of this talk, I would like to suggest that maybe you've started your journey of mastery towards thinking about security in a more productive and strategic way. Keep honing your skills. And finally, purpose, the yearning to do what we do in service of something larger than ourselves. With more and more tasks being subjected to automation, we're going to see a greater move towards purpose maximizing led organizations. So how can knowing this help you get better on with your security team? Well, security teams spend so much of their time thinking about threats and risks that they become overly suspicious. I'm constantly reminding security teams that bar a few edge cases, most people come to work to do a good job. And I'm making the assumption that people on this call today are one of those people. We need autonomous allies as security people, and that need has never been any greater. So you need to convince the security teams to loosen the reins a bit in order to be able to achieve autonomy in your job, which also will mean that you do your job faster, with less impediment, and you'll be able to show the security team. But by showing the security team you have a desire to learn about security, they're going to loosen those controls for you as well.
Once you've evidenced enough times, small security decisions can lead to bigger ones. And this is where the mastery comes in, which, if you remember, is when challenges are met with your expertise. It stands to reason then the more you master security, not being in the security team, the more interesting challenges you'll come across, making your job much more interesting. And then finally, once the security team sees evidence of you as an autonomous and masterful ally, you can help them in your organization's greater purpose in what you do, but also in what they do for the organization and their people. You can drive that and have a stake in how that culture is formed, creating not only good practices, but better working environments. And you can do this entirely selfishly, because if you think about helping security in this way, you'll give your job some more meaning.
And this will make you feel like you're contributing to a bigger picture, and you'll gain more skills in that area, and an area that's increasing demand, money, money, money. And it's also gaining skills that can be applicable to other areas of your job. And finally, because you have autonomy, you're more likely to be self-directed, enabling you to work on your terms, your way. Now, this seems like a good time to start reflecting on what we've discussed. So, Jeff, what are our key takeaways?
Well, I hope you'll take some ideas about product security away from today, but I feel like the three most important concepts are: it's not all about the tech. Shift left into product security. Get everybody thinking about like our abusers, and as early as possible. Create a great culture around it, removing barriers and the gatekeeper mentality. With autonomy, mastery, and purpose, we can deliver securely every single time. And build this into your lean, agile discovery and delivery processes, using mixed tools and techniques for all. And with these takeaways in mind, we want to leave you with an often forgotten notion.
And that notion is, the reason why security functions exist in a modern organization is to enable the business to take risk. Risk isn't a dirty word. The most successful companies and people are risk takers. Risk is good. Risk gives you that competitive edge. And when it's done right, it can really enable the business to move forward. But it's hard for me as a security person to be able to enable you to make calculated risks if I don't know what you're doing. I come into that process really late, so I've got to bolt on really ugly security requirements onto your lovely shiny application. And if I don't feel like you're going to support me in taking some of the ownership and accountability and all that feeding and watering that comes with taking on a risk for as long as it's in the system. However, I know that risk enables innovation. And because risk is my business, I can't think of a better place to innovate than starting with security. Now, when I think about collaboration, I'm reminded of a story that when President Kennedy visited NASA in 1962 for the first time. During his tour, he met a cleaner who was carrying a broom, and he said to that cleaner quite casually, "What do you do at NASA?" To which the cleaner replied, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." That cleaner knew, without a shadow of doubt, one, what his purpose was, that everyone needs to contribute to bigger things, and thirdly, he also knew that doing the job he was doing, he was freeing others to do theirs. And that's what this talk has really been about, reevaluating everything you know about security and your role to protect your organization. It's not about picking sides, defender, attacker, but about embracing both, because not all paths will be the happy path. Hackers are using what makes us human against us. Let's use what makes them hackers against them. Because when you follow the cables, behind every piece of tech is a person, a consumer, a creator, and even a hacker. And we should never lose sight of this. I hope you enjoy fooling around and finding out. We have been Jeff and Lianne, and please catch us in the autumn when we should be launching our product security podcast, Compromising Positions, to continue this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay safe out there.